So I've been looking forward to the next panel all year. This is one of the first panels that we thought about putting together, and I think it puts a very different spin on peace building. Good, and here they come now. So it is a great pleasure to welcome, as they come on the stage, I'm sorry we don't have music, and lights and big screens. But this is our keynote panel on team building and human empowerment. How do we imagine creative teams for peace? And I started thinking about this topic after reading the book Creativity, Inc. by Ed Catmull, the president of Pixar, in which he talks about how to maximize teams for creativity. And you can't imagine the amount of conflict that goes into creating a feature-length animated Pixar film. And as I thought about his views on how you inspire teams, how you bring together different strengths, I started thinking about peace building as an exercise in unusual teams. We bring diverse sectors and often bitter enemies together as a team to consider a new future. And we thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have expertise from a whole range of dynamic teams, different kinds of teams, to inform our work on peace building and to let us know how they build winning teams. So I'd like to welcome all of you here today, and what I'll do is introduce each of you in turn. You'll come up to the mic, and then we'll go down our row. So it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our first speaker, the Honorable Charles Bolden, the Administrator of NASA. During General Bolden's 34 years in the Marine Corps, he traveled into orbit 4 times aboard the space shuttle, including deployment of the Hubble telescope, enabling photographs of the universe that put all of our earthly conflict into a very different perspective. As administrator, Bolden leads a nationwide NASA team to advance the missions and goals of the U.S. space program, ushering in a new era in space exploration. Initiatives under his watch include the landing on Mars of the Curiosity rover, the launch of a spacecraft to Jupiter, and continued progress to the 2018 launch of the Webb telescope that will replace the Hubble. We are thrilled to welcome you to our peace-building community. Thank you.
Melanie, thank you so very much. And before I begin what I guess are formal remarks, I'd like to give a special thanks to my friend Bob Berg for introducing me to the work of the Alliance and for inviting me to join you for this. I must admit, before Bob and I talked about a year ago, I had never heard of the Alliance, but if you know Bob, as he is wont to do, when you walk away from the discussion, you feel like you've been involved in it for decades. So hopefully I will do him justice, and we'll walk away and he'll be glad he invited me to come. It seems appropriate to begin remarks at a gathering focused on peace to invoke the words of one of the greatest peacemakers, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and so I'll say this one. Dr. King said, "An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity." Hello, Vivian. Boy, I keep seeing people I know here. I think that's what we're all doing here. No matter the width and breadth of our achievements, if we're not thinking that broader concern, then we're likely not going to be successful in the long run. At NASA, we have perhaps one of the broadest purviews of anyone, not only our home planet, but also the solar system and the universe beyond. People likely think of NASA in terms of our astronauts, and since I am one, or used to be one, I'm happy to be one of those universal ambassadors for international goodwill. I think the astronaut corps has been one of the greatest inventions of our times, and I'm talking about that in the broadest sense of, again, because the nations of many worlds have selected their best, most innovative, most skilled individuals to train for the ultimate journey, away from the confines of gravity into the heavens, where our planet can be viewed as a globe, an entity, and not a locality. The astronaut corps in the U.S. has also grown to include women and people of multiple races, religions, and ideologies, something we're striving to strengthen and expand. I might mention the 2013 class of astronauts, which is now full-fledged astronauts and soon to begin being assigned to fly. We selected 8 out of 6,800 applicants, and for the first time ever that I can remember in anything I've been involved in, we had 50% women, 50% men, so 4 men, 4 women, and they are all incredible. We just recently closed out the application process for the class of 2017 astronauts, and we were shocked when the response was 18,300 people who want to leave the planet. As you look at the political goings-on, I'm not sure that their desire to explore is the complete explanation of that. But the makeup of the NASA astronaut office increasingly looks more and more like today's world, and they inspire the next generation to do the things about which people born in my generation only dreamed. My generation dreamed, but also we did. I'm proud to be giving the next generation a firm foundation from which to make their own way through the cosmos, to become better stewards of our planet, to look for life elsewhere in our universe, and to make humanity proud by doing things that were once thought impossible. I think that's the basis of peace building as well. Providing inspiration and hope for a better tomorrow makes people want to work together to focus on the positive and on the ways we can collaborate and embrace our differences for the betterment of all. So I think what we do at NASA makes very strong contribution to peace. We have helped the world move from a space race to an era of international cooperation. We're building next generation or next-gen aircraft and next-gen transportation systems to space as well. Why not next-gen peace? In fact, all of these things fit together. As we increase the capabilities to explore, we improve Earth. The International Space Station's water reclamation system, for instance, is a technology that has been adapted to help people on Earth who have limited access to fresh water, combating one of the largest killers of infants in the world, which is just the lack of clean drinking water and waterborne pathogens. The NASA USAID Servir program brings space to village. As many of you will know, the Spanish verb servir means to serve. This unique program brings space to village as it combines earth science data from space with data from ground observations. Through use of this data, scientists are able to apply all this knowledge toward giving local decision makers, farmers, and disaster relief authorities the ability to make better decisions, better choices about resource use, crop and water planning, recovery from natural disasters, and many other ways to improve stability and make the world a better place in which to live. Servir is gathering information in the service of a better way of life for our Earth. That's building next-gen peace. Now, as a military leader and a commander of missions to space, I've been at the head of a few teams. As the leader of our nation's civil space agency with some 18,000 federal employees and more contractors working to make our journey to Mars unfold, I'm required to do a lot of international team building. At the same time, we manage dozens of science missions throughout the solar system and peering beyond it, and improve the technology on the runways and in the airspace of aviation systems worldwide. Let's just say that, too, is a lot of team building. There's no way any of this happens in a vacuum, no pun intended. Even the vacuum of space is populated by international crews aboard the International Space Station that orbit our planet 16 times every normal Earth day, seeing sunrises and sunsets repeatedly, witnessing the entire sweep of our Earth every single day as no one else does. Viewing our wonderful planet from that special vantage point is an incredible experience, let me tell you. At times, you feel quite removed from the daily life of the planet, and you can see its fragile beauty. But then, you see the enormity of a hurricane as observed from space, or the huge plumes of smoke from a wildfire that are visible hundreds of miles above the surface. In the blackness of space, on the dark side of Earth, with billions of stars as a backdrop, you see the giant metropolises like Tokyo, Paris, New York City, sending their million points of light out into the darkness, and the human story in which we all take part becomes central to your thoughts. So I think our space program is perhaps the greatest example of how we can cross borders for peaceful purposes and peaceful pursuits of something greater than ourselves on behalf of all humanity. We can work together toward a greater purpose. Certainly, one of the International Space Station's greatest legacies will be how it brought diverse nations together to build something big and lasting, a legacy project on which humanity can build to travel farther into the solar system. Something we can all agree is a wonderful testament to human ingenuity, a platform for extending our reach that bears the contributions of many nations who may not always agree on everything back here on the ground. Science and technology cross borders in the very best of ways because they bring together the greatest minds of nations to work on the big challenges that we face. They help us uncover new knowledge and shape the future together. They're doing so right now. Undoubtedly, a lot of you have heard about our journey to Mars. It's something on which our generation and the next are going to have to work hard over the many years to bring to fruition. So we have to build a firm foundation on international collaboration, a consensus plan on a way forward. And we're doing just that. We're closer than ever to sending humans to the red planet. And there's wide consensus, not only here in the U.S. Congress and the administration, which I know is hard for you to believe, but among our partners in industry and academia. There is now consensus among our international partners that our horizon goal is Mars in the 2030s. We have a stepping stone approach to build our way there, to mature technologies as we go. The question is no longer why Mars, but how can I be a part of it? Our plan is affordable, sustainable, and achievable. It's a legacy I'm proud to leave the Mars generation, the students in school right now that are going to be in the first boots on Mars. They are people like my 3 granddaughters who have never known a time in their lives when people of many nations have not lived and worked together in space aboard the International Space Station, now nearly 16 years and counting. They've not lived one single second when there have not been at least 2 people from 2 nations, always the United States and Russia, living and working together on the International Space Station. They're the generation that has never known a time when it was not easy to connect with someone across the globe to share their experience or knowledge, to make friends with other people of other cultures and many nations, and to build bridges to the future where a global endeavor of many nations working together venture to Mars. So how do we build a team for peace? As I said earlier, I think space is a great unifier in the pursuit of the peaceful improvement of humanity's capabilities. Indeed, it improves life for everyone on the globe. The team is composed of international partners, and we have a lot of dialogue and exchange. We allow our partners to pursue their interests and for those interests to inform and enhance our work. We've built the international crews aboard the ISS to do research to improve our knowledge of how to live and work safely and healthily in space for the long term. Some 90 nations have now used the International Space Station for research, and around 250 experiments are going on in any given 6-month period. The team also relies on innovation of industry and entrepreneurs, for instance, to develop the commercial resupply systems currently bringing cargo and experiments to the station, and which will soon transport astronauts once again from American soil. I won't say it's easy or that things always go smoothly, but I can always say it's worth it. Now, as the types of people on these teams, people think of NASA in terms of technology and space, but we see ourselves in broader strokes. Yes, we are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but the arts and design are also critical. It's a potent recipe because we're trying to win hearts and minds. Our work is not just simply about exploring. It's about the human spirit, the need to do great things. It's about humanity's story and our quest to determine at last if we have companions out there, even if they're just microbes. It's about sharing that story through writing and painting and music. So the teams we build for peace have to be the same. They must be nuanced and deep, with a strong foundation of knowledge, but brushed with the hand of an artist and molded with the input of philosophers and thinkers, with diplomats and politicians to help implement policy that enables the bigger, bolder visions like explorers and scientists to travel on missions completely independent of Earth. Everyone is necessary. At NASA, I always say that excellence and passion are what we're looking for. If you're willing to do hard work and help me put boots on Mars in whatever capacity you do it, then I want you on my team. So as we discuss today the team building that we need to create next-gen peace, I, for one, would like to think more about the context in which we build our teams. Are we too focused or rigid? Or are we open to other viewpoints and ways of doing things, and ways that our work can be enhanced by people who are not like us in thinking, training, nationality, culture, or religion? It's how humanity is going to expand its reach to other places beyond the confines of our home planet. It's going to be how we keep this wonderful home of ours safe from the changing climate, and how we learn ever more about our place in the universe. It's how we keep our planet a place where explorers will want to return, even as they regale us with their stories of the amazing things they've seen, like humanity's eyes seeing the sun rise over the plains of Mars or the icy seas of Europa. All of this is possible if we continue to build the right teams to make it happen. Mars is within our grasp because the people and the teams to get us there are forming and evolving right now. It's going to be one of the most challenging and exciting accomplishments humanity has ever undertaken, and it's only possible through peaceful cooperation. At NASA, we thrive on turning science fiction into science fact and making the impossible possible. Relevant to the idea of humanity venturing out on a common journey farther than we've ever seen before, I'd like to end with another Martin Luther King Jr. quote. We may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. Thank you all.
Thank you, Charlie. I cannot imagine a more beautiful and inspiring and philosophical and poetic way to begin our discussion today. Thank you. So our next speaker is Dr. Andrew Walshe. Dr. Walshe is a leader in the field of elite human performance. He is currently the director of high performance for Red Bull, where he works with hundreds of international athletes and cultural opinion leaders, supervises a team of industry-leading scientists, engineers, physicians, and technologists to develop and implement elite performance models. Speaking of space, Dr. Walshe was the performance manager for Red Bull Stratos, leading the performance plan for Felix Baumgartner's record-breaking jump to Earth from the stratosphere in 2012. And I encourage you, all of you, to watch that video. It just sends incredible shivers up your spine. Prior to joining Red Bull, Dr. Walshe worked with the U.S. Olympic ski and snowboard teams and has held senior consulting roles with a large number of organizations, including the Armed Forces, Fortune 500 companies, artists, and athletes worldwide. Andy, welcome.
Oh, Melanie, thank you very much, and to the Alliance for Peacebuilding, thanks for having me here today. It has been a wish and a hope of mine that some of the stories we learn from all these great talents we get to work with would be able to extend beyond the realms of entertainment, sport, and military to some greater global causes. So it's indeed a real pleasure to be here today, Melanie. And my plan is just to share with you a little bit about what we do, hopefully give you some insights into teams, creativity, and some projects we have running there, and maybe support some of the goals and targets you have. I'm going to start with a quick video because sometimes people get a little confused about the types of work we do. Now, the cynics in the room will look at this as a very savvy marketing plug. I promise you it isn't. It really is just, from my lens, the type of talent we get to work with. And when I say we get to work with, the people we get to learn from. So in this clip, it goes for about a couple of minutes, bear with me, rip your marketing hats off, look at it through the lens of a coach, from an understanding of what can we learn from these great talents on how to build better peacemakers.
If you're gonna stay around and be safe for your whole life, then you never really lived and you're already dead.
Riding a big wave like that is a pretty indescribable feeling.
This is Big Snoop Dogg, and this is Sound Clash, so stay tuned.
Red Bull, they've been trying to push boundaries musically.
The MC in me wants to see, like, who's gonna be the sickest individual.
There's never a circumstance where there's no consequence.
Fantastic community of people who excel in their field, and that's the one characteristic across that whole portfolio. Obviously athletes, musicians, artists, social entrepreneurs, communities of photographers in the cultural space, filmmakers. So really a great network of people who excel at what they do, and our program is designed to firstly understand what is it about these individuals that allow them to perform at the very top of their game, and through that understanding can we develop programs that help support them in the achievement of their goals. To do that, we've had to set out models, and this is where I'd like to just hopefully give you a few tips about our process. We look at every sport, and we look at every individual and who they may be from a perspective of best-in-class skills. So if we decide that compassion is a particular trait that may support the goals and achievements of a particular community, we look at best-in-class behaviours there. We look at creativity, we look at the musicians and the cultural communities. We look at the ability to perform under pressure, and we may identify talent within the military communities. Explorers are a real community of fascination for us. People who look beyond the horizon. People who set extraordinary goals for themselves and want to go that extra depth and don't listen to sort of conventional wisdom. So we build models around the particular individual based on best-in-class characteristics. And to give you a little example, this is sort of a generic one we use. And it's so generic, it's actually probably useless for most intents and purposes, but it gets the point across. Put yourself, your team, your organisation at the middle of that framework of human performance. And then what are those subsequent skill sets and characteristics that require or support success in that space? And we break it down just like that. And it does two very simple things for us. One, it allows us to organise our programs, aggregate the information from talent that we work with and bring it together in some sort of construct. Two, when we do build teams around these models, it helps us allocate roles, job responsibilities, resources and assets. So it really is a powerful tool for us. I would be fascinated to hear from this community what that would look like for organisations such as the Alliance, or for individuals who are working in that space. What does it require to be extraordinary in your field, and how do we go about then developing that? Fundamentally, I think when we talk about building teams, and some of the programs we work with consist of very, very large teams, I think we lose sight of the fact that in many cases it always starts with individuals. So one of the key metric for us is when we're trying to build an extraordinary team is first start with that individual. Understand them at a very high level so that we can help develop them first. Because you'll hear it over and over again, great teams are made up of extraordinary people. So helping people who within that team find themselves, understand themselves at the highest level, that really is a key component of what we do. So we start with that to help build a team so that it builds up the great performances. One of the fundamental reasons I want to use the example of Stratos was because I think it speaks to a very core premise of a great team and great organisation, is that vision or idea of a sort of a benchmark goal. This is a drawing Felix, who was the gentleman who jumped from the stratosphere and broke that record, which has subsequently been beaten by Google, just so we put it out there. He drew this when he was a young kid, and you can see from a very young age there was something bigger driving him. He had a passion, a drive to do something, obviously very remarkably in many cases, directly tangential to what he was doing in many later years in his life. But what many people don't understand is through that process, and if you follow the trajectory of Stratos closely, you know that Felix struggled. He had some challenges, being first a base jumper, which is an individually based sport, moving into a large team of many people from NASA, from Charlie's World, and other communities. He really found it tough to work in that environment. So in many cases, that was a personal struggle he had to overcome. So we did a lot of work with Felix as an individual. How do we help him overcome what he needed to do to achieve the goals he'd set for himself? But the team itself, again, following the trajectory of that jump, the day of the launch, and many people don't realise it was 7 years in the making. Some people get the idea that Rebel just turns up and lets things go, and sometimes that's the case, but in this case it was a long, long path. And the day of the launch itself, we're standing there at the side of the runway in Roswell, and this balloon was set up to launch, and it needs very, very little wind for these things to get off the ground. A slight gust of wind comes through, pushes the balloon over, and boom, the balloon goes down. And so the team itself had to be able to be prepared to deal with those sorts of challenges along the way. So Felix first, facing his own personal challenges and the work we had to do with him, then the team itself. And one of the big successes of the project was we identified early on that, as with any of these great challenges, you need to anchor yourself in something bigger than the individual, bigger than the team. And one of the big core marks of this particular program was the idea of being remembered as a team that would not back down in the face of challenge. How do we want to be remembered was a personal conversation that started with Felix. When he was in his darkest times, he had basically suffered a nervous breakdown. We sat down and talked to him about how does this look when you sit back in about 40 or 50 years, how do you want to tell this story? And it wasn't a push, it wasn't a shove, it was just an understanding. Are you prepared to do what it takes to commit to this? This grew from Felix's personal trajectory to ours. As a team, how did we want to be remembered? We wanted to be remembered as that community of people that no matter what obstacle got in our way, we would push and persevere through. And that was really important for a project such as Stratos, a flight test project, which is just benchmarked by pushing right to the very edge of what we were capable of doing, breaking, falling down, making mistakes, and then taking a breath, resetting, and taking that next step. And as we reflected on the program, we thought closely about what did we miss as part of our development? What had we not done as part of this process of developing Felix and the team for Stratos? And we leaned heavily on Joseph Campbell's work in reflection, and fundamentally talked about the idea that we'd had a great plan. The team had been organised well, we had the resources we needed, but we hadn't trained for that unknown. Anyone who's tried to do something above and beyond understands that you're not treading in anyone else's footsteps. You're carving your own path, and be prepared for the plan to go out the door pretty quickly. So how do we prepare for that? So since that particular project, we spent a lot of time focusing on training techniques and tools to develop people to handle that stress and the challenge of falling over, getting back up, basically. And so what we did for many years since then has developed processes and programs that put individuals in very tough and austere environments, particularly our very top talents, challenge them repeatedly in a very crafted and methodical way, and through basically a process called stress inoculation, develop the skill sets to participate at the highest level in these particular events. And I know there's a few neuroscientists in the room, so recently we put 5 young ladies, world-class athletes, for a process. Pretty tough training camp, physically, socially, emotionally challenged them through the process, supported at every level along the entire journey, and we showed that even in 8 days we can change the body's ability to handle that type of stress and that sort of challenge. And so we've really developed the art and craft of preparing people for these very, very tough environments. And again, just some ideas of the ways that potentially people can prepare for the work that you're doing, in that I don't know the tools and techniques, I haven't seen the models of what it takes to be an extraordinary peace builder. But the idea that you can prepare at a very, very high level nowadays for these particular challenges that you may undertake, and that preparation does really manifest itself in the burgeoning field of the sciences. So I did want to speak and sort of finish up and talk about the creativity side of the equation of human performance. As we look across developing people to do the particular things they do, we understood fairly early on that creativity was one of those hallmark pieces of human optimization that really unlocked the key to so many things, but we really didn't have a good framework about which to prepare people for. So as we look towards developing this next generation of talent across all our fields, creativity has become one of our hallmarks or benchmark programs that we really are trying to focus on. Whether it's redefining how a sport is played, whether it's coming up with an extraordinary new piece of music or art, or if it's coming up with a solution to a very tough problem. The idea of how do we capture the essence of creativity in individuals and teams and prepare people for that really has the frontier of human optimization. So we looked across the literature and we looked across the world, and we sort of thought we really need to understand the process of this to understand how we then may be able to train it. So we set out a very simple program where we got the machine in the very first instance, the computer to go out and machine read all the literature in the world on creative process. About 15,000 articles it ingested into the machine. This is the beauty of technology nowadays. You don't have to sit there and do it yourself. You can get the machine to do it for you. But unfortunately, the machine misses a lot. Context, subtlety, the pieces that are really only captured in the experts. So we then set about asking up to about 500 individuals their process of creativity. Experts, again, across many, many fields: sport, culture, arts, science, policy. How do you create? What is the process you go through by which you then develop those great new ideas, those particular problem sets that you need to solve? And then, having done that, we thought it would be fantastic to open up to the world. Everybody has something to offer. Can't we get the world to participate in this conversation? So we broadly named them sort of the artificial intelligence is the research, because the machine did it for us. The expert intelligence being the sort of pieces we extracted from the interviews, and then the collective model to see what we could get from sort of opening up that conversation. So that's kind of a big intro, but the reality of it looks like this. We realised, having gathered the data, that the real essence of creativity came from some of the best subject matter experts. And we chose a couple of examples here just to show you what that looked like.
A certain amount of uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to be.
Yeah, you have to be.
The way I describe it to people in the business we are in exploration, you have to have your head in the clouds, but you have to have your feet on the ground. If we push the limit and fail, that should not intimidate us.
Right.
Because if we get too intimidated by failure, then we'll shy away from pushing the limit. And failure should be looked at as something to learn from, not something to be afraid of.
So Charles introducing the idea of the process of tolerating failure. So hopefully that ties back to that previous example where we'd done a lot of training to develop people to accept failure and push through failure, understand failure. We start to see it manifesting itself in the creative space equally. But always the musicians have something extraordinary to offer, and I just love this clip because I think it really captures the essence of what we're trying to discover in this program.
Don't do what you want them to do. Of course, the instrument will say, no, it ain't me, it's you. Right. The instrument talks back. You never can overwhelm an instrument. All you can do is get to the, you can bring yourself to your own competence. But there's always more left in the instrument.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
Sure.
You will never get out all of this piano what's in it.
Yes,
absolutely. An instrument can bring you to your limits.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that really what creativity in a sense is about?
Yeah. if you can think of it.
Right.
See, that's the key.
Right.
You know, making it to create it in your mind.
It's the tool for transformation.
Yes, yes. There you got it. You got it. That's a great way to put it.
As I said, you don't capture that stuff in the literature reviews. So I think it's important that we do this as we develop this greater understanding of human capacity, that we start to bring these sort of worlds together. And so the model itself looks like this. It's a platform and it's actually open. It's hackingcreativity.com. 15 years of creativity research just aggregated and organised, and the colours in the sort of web visualisation you see there. You can go in and look at every article. Every article is organised and strategically sort of mapped for you so that you can get the essence of what that research is about, which was important. We wanted to make sure we did due diligence with respect to the work we're looking at. But then individual stories. 500 staggering volunteers across many, many fields sharing their individual stories of creativity, art, moments, things that inspire them around their creative process. And we flattered those two data sets, and we learned some amazing things, you know. These two individuals here, Kirsten and Rodney, both extraordinarily creative in their field. Rodney developed the sort of modern form of skateboarding. Kirsten's a dancer for Cirque du Soleil. But very, very different approaches. In this particular case, Rodney perseveres and pushes through. Kirsten basically, first thing fails, she goes another path. So we start to see these patterns about individuals within these teams of people. Another example here, two rocket scientists. You can see I'm sort of drawing on Charles' world here. Two very, very different rocket scientists. One loves the privacy and the quietness to do her creative work. She loves to get away. The other can't get it done unless she's in a room full of people buzzing and ideas are flowing. So again, we start to see these patterns and trends, and overall develop a sort of model of around a dozen or so different creative styles, which we started and are just beginning to think about how does that implement in terms of building teams. In particular, you know, the mass workspace open plan model, improved creativity. Well, it was pretty, we just redesigned our building along these lines, and it was pretty interesting to understand that only about 15% of the people in the building actually like to work this way, and really, and it helped their creative process. So rethinking that a little bit. But 8,000 people in the public have now participated, and sort of to bring this all together, this idea that very, very different models of creativity exist. In particular, teams, when we put people in the room together and think about building teams to optimise creativity, drawing from very different communities, having them do the survey and then picking them based on their strengths and weaknesses, not sort of having a team of too many similar individuals. And ultimately, supporting other organisations is one of the goals. So we spoke to Melanie about if you're interested in looking at potentially the creative styles of peace building, that's an opportunity for people to participate there. And it's open source, it's open public, it's not a branded platform. So anyone has access to the data and research, so it's just an invitation there to support you guys. And finally, I think just sort of wrapping it up, we're at a point in time where we understand more and more about human optimization and human performance potential than any other time in our history. And it's sort of interesting for us to sort of think about this next phase of human growth and evolution in terms of, will we in a position to manage and control that in a way we never have before? And as we learn about all these extraordinary people and how they do the very fine work they do, sort of in our communities, what are we going to do with that information? How are we going to share it? And yes, making athletes better, artists, military, all that sort of thing has a very specific purpose and keeps you sharp. But now we're in a position to start to share that with communities like yours, and that really is the thrilling future for human performance as we see it. Taking those lessons from the very best in the world, breaking them down and bringing them back where they can make real impact on a global scale, and understanding what it may do for peace would be a sort of dream come true for people like myself, because I think that's ultimately where we'd like to play. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Andy. I had the great privilege to be at the conference in November called Hacking Creativity that Andy and his team put together. So to hear for 2 days, we heard bomb disposal experts, a musician who had founded Steely Dan, who's now a consultant to the Defense Department, neuroscientists, artists, all talking about creativity. And it reinforced for me the fact that peace building is a deeply creative process at the same time that it feels like surfing those waves that we saw in your video. So thank you, Andy. So when we think of teams, another that came to mind was military teams, and increasingly now, not just a band of brothers, but also a band of sisters. And it is a great, great pleasure to honor today and to welcome General Kimberly Field, who currently serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations at the State Department. General Field recently retired from the U.S. Army as a Brigadier General, last serving as a Joint Staff Deputy Director for Political and Military Affairs for the Middle East. And since her commissioning from West Point, General Field has served in a variety of command and staff positions in the U.S., Germany, Iraq, the Balkans, Somalia, and Afghanistan, only the easy cases. And she has taught at West Point and also served 2 tours with the Department of State. Welcome, General Field.
Well, good morning. I tell you, there's nothing that will sap your creativity more than knowing that your 11:30 panel was at 9:30. It was the most horrific feeling ever, in 28 years maybe. Anyway, oh, I could have blamed it on the Metro right now. I'm going to talk today really almost the opposite of what we just heard, which is not to say lack of creativity. It's really about the human fundamentals that I have found that if we're ever to build teams and to achieve a greater optimization of performance, that we need to remember some certain real fundamentals that seem obvious, but I think very much worth talking about. My main point here is that building internal teams and leadership of teams of your own people is relatively easy compared to building what I call external teams. I don't know if that's a real phrase or not. But to remember that the team that you're on is much bigger than the team you lead. And in the peace-building field, I can't think of a field that has to remember that more. With the various actors, whether it's the host nation, vigilante forces, the military, the State Department, all of us coming from different bureaucratic perspectives, different resourcing streams, different cultures. Graham Allison in the Cuban Missile Crisis lives, right? Organizational politics and bureaucratic politics. It's really alive. So I will say, and I'll speak blasphemy, that tactical command in the military, command, up to the 2-star level is probably the easiest form of team building. And that's what a lot of us in the military are brought up in. You're in a position of authority, and everyone who works for you has assigned responsibilities, absolutely, in relation to each other, by law. If you don't do what you're told, there is something called USMC-Ret. And as I became a general officer, and I was not a tactical commander other than company command in Somalia and Operation Restore Hope, 200 people a long time ago, I would say this to some of my peers, and it was just sort of speaking a foreign language, that really is when you lead small teams of highly skilled people, 50 to 100 people, and you're expected to remember that you're contributing to something bigger, it's really much harder. Now, with the 3-star level and the 4-star level, it's different. And I was an executive officer to a 3-star operational commander in Afghanistan, and he could get it. He could get it fairly easily once we were absolutely immersed in this counterinsurgency environment. Really, he spent most of his time working with Afghans, with his Afghan partners, vast majority of his time, despite the fact that he had a 1,500-person staff that he had to run and could have easily been fully consumed with running that staff. He absolutely had to look up and out and work with his Afghan partners. But there's a couple other things that he used to say as time went on, and I was there 2 years with him, that I heard time and time again that I thought were worth sharing. One, doesn't matter, if it doesn't matter to you who gets credit, you'll get an awful lot done. Now, a lot of this sounds like stuff you learn in kindergarten, but I think it's really hard. When you've worked so hard on a project yourself, and all of a sudden you had to turn it over to somebody else, and your name's never even mentioned. It's really hard to just step back and say, it doesn't matter. In the end, you'll always get credit. In the end, you always will. And it may be an accumulation of multiple things you've done, but it will work. Another thing you always used to say was put draft and pre-decisional on every piece of paper and share it with everybody. And that's really hard, too, because information is power, right? But share it external to this command. Share everything that you know. And when I would tell my people that when I became a general, they would be, oh my gosh, in the Washington environment, you know, you just can't do that, and you know, you get blamed. And I said, I own that risk, right? So as leaders, I think we have to own the risk of our people when it comes to taking sort of bold moves like that. He also used to say that get everybody up on VTC, right? External team. Get everybody up in the same place having the same conversation. In peacebuilding, we have got to do that absolutely. We hear things differently, whether you're an NGO, and whether you're in the military or at state. You will hear different messages. And then he used to say you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we ought to use them in that proportion. Meaning listen more than you talk, right? Okay. I think that goes a long way as well. So then I became a general, and my first job was Deputy Director of Army Strategy for the big Army. And it was really hard. Here I was, a woman, non-combat arms officer, trying to help devise the Army of the future in a limited resource, a limited end strength going down in the Army with much wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth. How are we going to do this? So I came up with this great idea that broke a few red lines. And I had a mentor, and I wasn't getting anywhere, even though it made perfect sense. I had aligned the entire Army against all the missions that the Secretary of Defense gave us and showed it was possible. But it broke this thing called modularity of our brigades. And I just wasn't getting anywhere. And finally a mentor said to me, you, Kim, cannot carry this message. You've got to find a combat arms guy who walks the walk, talks the same talk as the people you're trying to convince. And I thought, boy, that rubbed me the wrong way. But it was, again, ego, doesn't matter who gets credit, in part. But I was sharing information. I did get everybody up on VTC. I did listen. I was adapting the concept. I couldn't do that. And I didn't, when I swallowed my pride, I simply didn't invest the time. I was so busy with the substance and perfecting and shining up the rock really nicely that I didn't invest my personal time as a leader in convincing my peers and getting somebody else to carry this message for me. We didn't get anywhere. But there's a happy ending, because 3 years later, 2 weeks ago, I got a call from someone on the Army staff who's still there and said, remember that thing you were working on? It's happening. It started way back then. So another lesson, patience. You know, I have learned as a general, working in these big bureaucracies as a general and now as a deputy assistant secretary, that you're never going to get a table slap. You're going to put static in the air, it's going to make a little lightning bolt, it's going to hit somebody on the head, and even that is just part of a bigger storm. So, you know, these are all really lessons that you learn really through failure. I think we learn through failure. Then I became deputy director in the Joint Staff of the Middle East at a time when we were trying to figure out Syria. And Syria is going so well, another grand success. This was not my fault. Okay. And what we found constantly was an immense frustration with the National Security Council staff, frankly. And there is nothing a 4-star general or a 3-star general hates more than being told what to do by a 28-year-old Harvard graduate and all her best friends. I'm telling you, it gets personal fast. And so I was constantly reminding up and ladder and down to my team that those people are the staff of the president. Just like we have staffs, you don't hear everything from the commander, you hear from a staff, whether we like it or not. And they're all really smart, and they're all really well-intentioned. And I think we have to remind ourselves constantly that the people we're dealing with outside our own organizations are not stupid. They have different facts, different perspectives. They have different information than you have, and they come from a different organizational position. So I would remind my people always, they're smart and they're well-intentioned. Go make it work. Go talk to them. So, you know, coming over to the State Department, a couple other lessons that I'll skip forward, but coming over to the State Department has been very interesting. I have found a lot of people ask me all the time, how is the transition been? It must be huge culture shock, huge change. And I would say not so much, not really. I was not a tactical commander. I was a staff leader, and I worked with 3-stars and 4-stars who understand the importance of looking to a team that's bigger than themselves, and that's really the business of state. The difference is that the military moves to action fast. They can move men and material and create effects on the ground tomorrow. And Foreign Service officers simply can't do that. So there's an aversion, unlike the military where it's all about action, and there's only goodness in action for the most part. For the State Department, they see nothing but risk. Risk in action, risk in alienating the host nation, risk in leaving partners like you behind, or not being able to give enough attention. And so that's very, very different. So I am always consumed with how do you then create more boldness, measured boldness in what we're doing, because in our world, we have successes, but we also have a lot of status quo, not being able to change things. Just doing what we've always done before, programming the same way, diplomatic activities the same. So how then do you convince others outside? You know, we're a functional bureau, so we always support everyone else. It's all about external teams. How do I convince an ambassador country team or a regional bureau or implementing partners that what we want to do makes sense and it adds value in their world? Well, one, identify who the decision makers are and find out what matters to them. And if your idea, your solution doesn't matter to them, it doesn't help solve their problem, you're not going to convince them that the problems they think they have are not really problems. It's not going to work. So anything that you want, anything you do has to accommodate that. So an example, we are embedding now, this is my military background, of course, but we are embedding civilians in Special Operations Command forward, Lake Chad Basin, the Operation Observant Compass with the Counter Lord's Resistance Army. We're putting civilians in these places to identify opportunities for, to make policy gains, civilian security gains, countering violent extremism gains. What does that do? It basically helps everyone understand the picture from that perspective, as well as provides opportunity to bring partners like you in for the solutions. Right now, do you think that would be sort of an easy sell? It was not an easy sell, not at all. Why not? Well, we don't do regional and state, really, forward. We don't do operational regional. We only do it back here in Washington. We don't do that. We don't really stick our people in military organizations where we think they're going to get all swallowed up. Right? So we had to convince for example, an ambassador in Chad that this was actually in his interest. Well, how? Well, he was really worried about that military presence there, that they were going to go rogue and do whatever they wanted to do. So for him, it was all about someone being in there to sort of tell him what the military is doing. Right? So, we really had to hit that hard, and that sort of worked. Anyway, there are other examples. We have a big initiative going on in East Africa. I'm happy to talk about that later. But really, in the end, I think it's really about simply just like building teams. It's really not necessarily creative teams, but solid teams. It's really about putting the mission first over yourself. That's really hard, often, even though we think it's not. We like to say that it's easy. And working really hard, doing your homework, getting the facts right. Because there is nothing like facts to combat people's opinions. Right? So that was the last lesson I think that I've picked up now. We more and more are turning to evidence-based programming, more and more to common understanding. Our initiative in East Africa is about developing a common operating picture, sort of a military term we brought into the civilian world a bit. But to do these things, to input these systems to affect them, really comes down to how we personally interact with our teammates that are bigger than the team we're on. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, and a great reminder to us to always be looking at what is the outside team and the other game that maybe we're not seeing. So thank you. So we have seen space teams, human performance teams, military teams, and now we turn to sports teams. It is a real pleasure to introduce Lon Babby, recently retired as senior advisor to the Phoenix Suns. Lon brings a unique vantage point to the formation and operation of sports teams, having been both a highly regarded agent representing players and then serving on the management side of an NFL, not FFL, I'm sorry, Lon, of a major basketball team. In his 5 years as president of basketball operations for the Phoenix Suns, responsible for leading the management of the Suns basketball team, including coaches, players, medical and training personnel, media and communications, and analytics. He led all contract negotiations involving players, coaches, and basketball operations personnel, and was responsible for the NBA team's salary cap management and budgeting. As a player's agent, Lon designed an innovative new model of player representation that charged clients on an hourly basis as opposed to a percentage of the contract, a really revolutionary form. His clients included Tim Duncan, Grant Hill, Ray Allen, Shane Battier, Chris Young, Tamika Holtzclaw, Tamika Catchings. And welcome, Lon. We're delighted you're here.
Good morning, everybody. I've done a lot of things in my 40 years professionally, but I can honestly tell you I've never followed an astronaut, a person who is at the outer limits of human capacity, and as if that wasn't enough, then a general. Melanie Greenberg was my wife's student when she taught 5th grade in New Haven, Connecticut, which may explain why I'm here. We have stayed in touch with Melanie all these years, and we love her dearly. But when she asked me to speak about successful team building, she obviously had no knowledge of the NBA standings, since the Phoenix Suns only won 25 games this year. But I have been associated with Super Bowl and World Series championship teams, and I have represented players on different teams that have won numerous championships in San Antonio, Los Angeles, and Boston. And I do believe that the lessons of team building in sports apply with equal force to the team building work that you do. Every one of these championship teams had talent, but as importantly, or even more importantly, they had a strength of character, a fiber that bound the players to a greater goal. The players on a championship team learn to get over themselves. They are willing to sacrifice for the good of the greater goal. Everyone plays not for his or her own stats, but for the greater good of the group. They willingly accept their roles, playing their part to achieve team success. To take an example from a completely different context, I love classical music, and one of my favorite pieces of music is Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony. I've heard it hundreds, if not 1,000 times, but I still can't whistle it. Why? Because you can't whistle a symphony. You need all the parts of the orchestra to play together to create beautiful music. A sports team or a peacemaking team is no different. Again, each player has to accept his or her role and his or her part in achieving team success. It's really, really hard to produce championship caliber team chemistry, and it is even harder to maintain it once a team has experienced success and people begin to focus even more on their own agendas. I like to think of every sports season as like a new school year. Your friends change a little bit over the summer, and so have you. With teams, you cannot assume that last year's chemistry will automatically still be there this year. You have to tend to it constantly. For this reason, what lies at the heart of successful team building is the trust that comes with relationship building and the character of each individual team member. This is particularly true, I think, of basketball, which to me, more than any other game, is a game of trust. You need to learn that if I pass you the ball when you're open, you're going to pass it back to me when I'm open. That when I make my proper defensive rotation, you're going to be in the right place so that I'm not embarrassed and my player doesn't slam on me. One of the most successful and beautiful relationships, I think, in all of sports, and maybe indeed in all of American culture, is the relationship between the San Antonio Spurs head coach Greg Popovich and Tim Duncan. Together they have won 5 championships and for 19 years have been a model of excellence. I was honored to represent Tim right from the beginning of his career when he was drafted by the Spurs and was the first pick in the 1997 draft. And if you ask me why they have been so successful, I would recount the following 2 stories. The first one involves a trip that head coach Popovich took before ever drafting Tim Duncan. Tim was born and raised in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. He was a swimmer until a hurricane destroyed his local pool, and he had no choice but to take up basketball. Tim's mom died from cancer when he was 14 years old. Prior to the draft, Coach Pop flew to St. Croix to spend a few days with Tim. This was their very first meeting. Pop wanted to see where Tim grew up, to see where he went to school, and where he first started playing ball. He wanted to meet Tim's father, his sisters, and his friends. Most importantly, Pop wanted to learn Tim's personal environment. Tim was so taken with Pop's interest in him, not just as a basketball player, but as a person, that an unbreakable relationship was formed. A relationship that built a trust and a friendship that laid the foundation for 5 championships and 19 years of unmatched NBA success. So for me, the first lesson of successful team building requires that you build relationships, that you as a leader prove that you care not only about the individual's professional talents, but who he or she is as a person. What do they care about? What are their family dynamics? This is the way to earn trust and respect. And by the way, this doesn't mean that Pop didn't push Tim and didn't coach him. Believe me, he coached him, and he still does today, 19 years later. But he adheres to one of my favorite maxims: you can be hard on the problem and soft on the person. Relationships are hard work. Pop didn't have to fly to St. Croix. There are so many nights when you prefer to go home rather than meet with a player for dinner. It is often the small things that make a big difference. Whenever I introduced a Suns player at a press conference, I made sure to introduce each member of his family, ask them to stand up so that we could welcome them properly to Phoenix. And the players always seemed to appreciate that. One of the things I enjoyed most in Phoenix was building a family room where players' families could hang out before games. We provided food, toys, babysitters, so that the moms could comfortably go out and watch the games. And at halftime, as the team passed the family room and headed to their locker room, there were the little kids lined up in their pajamas, ready to give their dads a high five. So remember, relationships and championships are built brick by brick, day by day. The second Tim Duncan story speaks to the role of character in successful team building. Before Tim's rookie season, I accompanied him on a commercial shoot. The commercial called for Tim to play one-on-one basketball in a backyard with David Robinson, who was then the star of the team and a future Hall of Famer in his own right. David had played at the Naval Academy and, of course, was known as the Admiral and was named as one of the 50 greatest players in NBA history. On the way to the shoot, an issue arose that might have ruffled David Robinson. When discussing the issue with Tim, I declared that I couldn't be worried about David Robinson. I was only worried about him. Tim looked at me and said, "You may not have to worry about David, but I do, because he is my teammate and it's going to be hard for him with the attention that I'm likely to get. So let's make sure that this works for him." And we did. Tim Duncan, age 22, teaching a character lesson to his then 45-year-old lawyer. Above all else, it is character that makes for a great teammate and a great team. And no one has ever epitomized that I've met more than Tim Duncan. Over the years, in varying contexts, I have learned an important and, I must admit, sometimes very, very painful lesson. If you are faced with a choice between 2 players or individuals, one with more talent and questionable character, and the other with less talent and higher character, always choose character over talent. But let's be perfectly honest. That is not always easy. So we persuade ourselves that we can rehabilitate and raise a person's character. It almost never works, but the talent is tempting. I thought I'd share with you one of my favorite scouting reports that we receive. We do a lot of background work before we draft a player, and we gather a lot of intelligence. And this is one of my all-time favorite reports. I'm not going to name the player, and I'm not going to name the source. You'll know why in a second. Player is described as being a disruptive force on the floor and in the locker room. Big-time weed smoker. Big-time alcohol drinker. Divisive within the team. Can be a problem going to bars with personal anger and drinking issues. can be difficult for some to coach. He's a con man, so don't be fooled. And then the conclusion, he is a decent second-round pick, and if he's there, I would seriously think about taking him. So you can be tempted. For sure, the work that all of you do is far more important than building a basketball team, but the lessons do apply with equal force. Whether you're building a coalition government, forging peace around a table, or resolving conflict in a remote village, relationship building, character, and trust are essential. Leaders, like players, must share the values of the end goal. If the leader or any of his or her team is there for himself and doesn't sacrifice for the greater goal, peace will lose. But if everybody is willing to play their role in order to win together, I firmly believe that peace can be achieved. More than anything, the beauty is in trying. And so I leave you with the following quote from Teddy Roosevelt. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, or who at worst, if he fails, at least fails with while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you so much, Lon. And you can speak to us anytime about peace building. I thought that the lessons were perfect. And no discussion about teams would be complete without musical teams. What is jazz or choral music but a very beautiful and dynamic team? And by the way, I'm always going to remember that you can't whistle a symphony. That was brilliant. So it is a great honor to welcome Tim Ries, a saxophonist, composer, arranger, producer, and educator, and peace builder. Since moving to New York in 1985, Tim has performed with the who's who of jazz, rock, pop, and world music icons. The Rolling Stones from 1999 to the present, Stevie Wonder, Paul Simon, Donald Fagen, Michael Jackson, Rod Stewart, jazz greats Red Garland, Donald Byrd, and Reddy Moore. He's worked with a huge range of world music artists and recently returned from a tour of Latin America and Cuba with the Rolling Stones. Tim worked very closely and played with Bob Belden, whose memory we are honoring at the conference this year, and is carrying on Bob's legacy of peace. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Actually, before I started speaking, I was going to play a little something, if that's okay. I normally have a speech written and then I kind of riff because I'm a jazz musician, so we just improvise, but I'm going to do my best to actually stick with the plan. I would like to thank very much Melanie Greenberg for inviting me here. I'm honored to be here at this conference with such distinguished and extraordinary people, not only here but in the audience, if it could be considered the audience. I'd also like to thank Richard O'Neill, Chip House, Julia Roig, Bob Berg, and all the wonderful people at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. I think they're doing an amazing job around the world. So, pardon me. All part of the act. If I can help in any way towards bringing about peaceful solutions and harmony anywhere on the planet, it'd be the single most important contribution of my life. Obviously, I'm a musician. I don't like to say that I'm a jazz or rock or world music or classical musician because I've played all those genres. I'm a musician who loves playing music with many different people. I've been rather fortunate and played with all these distinguished artists and musicians, including the Rolling Stones, for 17 years. Although mostly I would say that my main influences are jazz musicians, great improvisers. And I like to think about jazz as mathematics meets the soul, because for me that's what it is, because I love also math, and to put a great symphony together, it requires a composer to really be thinking about the structure, which is basically a mathematical formula of theory, but then something more than just the notes on the page have to come about, which means the soul and the heart, and to move somebody through music has to be more than just the notes. So music definitely has the component of both those elements. Musicians and entertainers and poets and artists, sports personalities, we're all quite lucky actually. We have a great deal of influence on society without having to run for office, thankfully. It can be a positive or negative influence, but usually it's positive. I'm fascinated by music from Africa and India, Brazil, South America, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, everywhere. Unfortunately, I only speak English. However, that has never been an issue when I play with music from various regions of the world. And that's just when you start playing, you just connect with the people. The most recent Rolling Stones tour, as Melanie mentioned, was South America and Cuba. It was actually the greatest tour that I've done with the band, I think. And they only play 2 or 3 nights a week, the Stones. So on the nights off, it has been my MO since I joined the band to contact local musicians, set up concerts, recordings, film the events, go to their houses, eat with their families. And I live as a local person when I go to these places. Most people go to the great cities of the world and they want to see the impressive architecture, landmarks, historical, landmarks and majestic scenery, which I love, but my time is spent with local people playing folk music of that region. Music that often goes back hundreds of, or perhaps thousands of years to Africa or India. This music speaks to my soul, music that connects us on a very deep and spiritual level. Music is the language of the soul. This is my thought, but no words need to be uttered. The vibration of people making music together goes to the core of the human spirit. There is no coincidence that all religions use music in their service. In any church you attend, hymns are sung. The Muslim call to prayer is not somebody on the microphone saying, "Please meet at 5:45 at sunrise." It's chanted if you ever go to these great cities of the world. The rabbi chants from the Torah. The Tibetan monks chant the mantra, etc. There's no coincidence. This connects us from above, from within, and resonates to every person. After the last tour, I flew to Spain to work with a great flamenco group, which I go there quite frequently. And I love flamenco, and I love the Andalusian area, and also the birthplace of flamenco, where Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived peacefully for many years, longer than actually the USA has been the USA. And I play with a lot of the singers there. When you hear a great singer in Spain of flamenco music, it's every single note has this resonance. It's like they're giving you everything they have at that moment. It's like the last time they're ever going to sing because they're giving you their thing. And one of the singers, Rubio de Pruna, who's sang for many years with Paco de Lucia, and this is how I feel too. As a singer, I said, you just sound incredible. You inspire me every time. He goes, well, my instrument is my heart. And that's beautiful because I feel the same way. It's like I studied Tai Chi for many years, and my master at that time, the great Master Ku, was 98 years old, and at 98 could do things that I couldn't do in my 20s, and this is just a couple of years ago. And he came and heard me perform a concert, and he spoke very little English, and so, again, another thing where it didn't really matter the language, it's just the movements, but he said, you're very close to God. And this is the last year of his life, actually. And I always felt that way, that music, it's coming from another place, and you're there to accept this and then to release this. So my music is in a way, my instrument is myself. I'm just, because I play saxophone, but I also play piano. After I went to Spain, I went to Budapest, and I'm doing an HBO documentary about Roma musicians. So I've been traveling to Budapest since 1988 and working in small villages of gypsies and playing this music, which has been an amazing experience. And then this talk for me was going to be very different until at the end of that tour, I went actually to Greece to work in a Syrian refugee camp. And I had been wanting to go there since this whole process started. In fact, I was in Budapest when they were flooding into the train station, and I couldn't get from that point to other points in Europe. And I had always wanted to go at that point to Greece, and I finally got the chance to go there. My experience at the camp was obviously life-changing, and I'm sure it would be the same for anyone who visited any of these camps. In this particular camp called Ritsona, which is about 90 miles from Athens, there's 800 people, 300 of which are children. There's 3 cold showers to share. There's tents, and that's about it. But there's amazing volunteers from Sweden, the Swedish company called Lighthouse Group, and also Joined Hands, which is a USA company, which is where I went to play with this group from California called the Wobbly World, which is a group of musicians from Africa, from Morocco, from Lebanon, and from all over the world. So we kind of joined there to play this concert and to go into the camps and work with the students and the children. And there was an amazing Greek general there who welcomed us into the camp, and it was incredible. Even before my visit to this camp, I was already very touched by the concerns of these desperate people trying to escape a brutal war where they're being attacked by their own leader, not to mention ISIS. I can't imagine the conditions they had to go through. There are many places in the world where conditions are awful, in Africa and India, and I could spend a lot of time talking about that, but I strongly believe that this refugee crisis needs to be addressed now. If safety and peace are truly our goals, then addressing this, I think, is of utmost importance. Not only is this about the refugee crisis, but is it about immigration? The United States is a country of immigrants, and somehow we've forgotten, once we're comfortable here, we want to close the doors on those who are in need, saying no more Muslims, and please, let's get rid of 11 million immigrants, which is obviously not attainable. And in this most recent situation, as it relates to the Syrian refugee crisis, I think that we need to be welcoming to our brothers and sisters. There has never been a time more important than now to be the country that says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. I grew up in Michigan, and as a child, I remember seeing all this open land, and it was very small. I used to think there's a lot of children in Detroit that don't have any money, and they have no food, so why don't we just bring them here? There's a lot of space. They can just use this land and grow their own food. Or we can just take truckloads full of food to the city, and they can then have that, which obviously didn't happen. So when the refugees came into Hungary, I was there at a friend's house, and we were watching this on the news, and a little girl, who was the daughter, said, Mommy, why don't we just get in our car and drive there and go pick up these people and bring them home? So I have 3 daughters. When you're a parent, you teach your children to be kind, thoughtful, respectful, generous, and to play well with your classmates and your neighbors and your siblings. But as adults, are we embodying these principles? So far, after many years, it doesn't seem that we're practicing what we preach. Children see it. When I was at the camp, the children flocked around us. They wanted to be close. They held our hands. They wanted to catch with us. They wanted to play soccer. I brought musical instruments for them to play, and they smiled, they laughed, and they connected immediately. And there was a group of clowns that were there playing with them, and some of the parents said that's the first time they'd seen them smile or laugh since they left Syria. The first day in the camp, I was a little hesitant to just go there and pull out my horn and play as being the New Yorker, and I'm here to impress you. For whatever reason, I just didn't feel right about that. But As I arrived, I walked down this little lane in between the tents, and there was a guy playing violin in one of the tents, and it happened to be this guy, George Lamam, who was a Palestinian who grew up in Lebanon and now lives in California and plays with this group, Wobbly World. Very cool group. So I went into the tent, and there was a Kurdish woman with 7 children. Her husband had died, and he was playing these beautiful melodies from Egypt, from Turkey, from Syria. He was playing these melodies, and the woman started crying these melodies. She knew this was her folk songs. So she was singing, and I didn't know the music. I didn't know George or the family, but then I feel like I could connect. So I started playing along with George. He started playing the melodies, and I just started improvising with him. And immediately the kids came over to me, and we started playing, and I had brought some flutes, I brought some percussion instruments. All the kids heard this. They came from other tents, and they started coming, and I luckily had about 70 instruments, so I just started handing out. And this little girl came up to me, and she was so unbelievably cute. She was maybe 6 years old, and she followed me around for the rest of the week that I was there. And if I had one more day, I had another instrument to give her, because it was like, but there were 3 other children. I just didn't have enough. So by the way, I'm going to go back every month and work at this camp. And while we were doing this, there happened to be a woman from NPR there for This American Life. She was filming it and recording it, so I have no idea what I said on the microphone. I hope it's okay. But there was also 2 gentlemen in the camp that were musicians, and we were able to bring them their instruments that they play. One's kind of a little bit like an oud kind of an instrument, but slightly different, and then a percussion instrument. So we brought them out of the camp with 50 camp refugees and brought them to this concert that we did, which was pretty amazing for sort of a celebration of the Greek people who have done so much to help the refugees. And that was amazing to see the people from the camp, the general public of the Greece, and our band, and just kind of the emotional. It was like an outpouring of actually beauty and emotional. Anyway. What was I going to say? I'm sorry, I did leave. I started riffing, I'm sorry. Before I left to go to this camp, it was right before I left, and I was with a friend, a pretty close friend, who said, we were talking about the refugees, and I said, so when I look in the eyes of it, let's just say he was on the other side of the spectrum of politics. So when I look in the eyes of a 5-year-old child, am I looking at a terrorist? He said, well, until they're vetted, we don't know. So yes, they could be. But I realized this was just a person this is a New Yorker. I just thought, this is not an unusual concept, as we all know. I'd like to just bring your attention to a book that I read recently called Radical by Majid Nawaz. I don't know if you've ever read this book, but it's pretty incredible. And he obviously was radicalized by growing up as a Pakistani Muslim in a mostly white neighborhood. All of his friends were white, and at age 11, his best friend punched him in the stomach and said, I can't play with you anymore because you're Muslim. My father told me I can't play with you. And at this point, he kind of joined with other Muslims and kind of started a gang and basically became radicalized. Long story short, spent 5 years in a prison in Egypt, has now changed over, and this book is pretty incredible. It talks about his transformation. Now he speaks about peace, and he's worked with the United States government, I know, and also with England, so an amazing individual. So I feel like my entire adult life actually has been preparing me to be here, actually. All my musical connections around the world have led me to, and the years of teaching, I've taught little children up through university students for the last 30 years of my life. I have a great friend, Jamie Haddad, who's a percussionist, who's a Lebanese-American, grew up in Cleveland. He plays with Paul Simon. And 25 years ago, we wanted the idea to start this ensemble of musicians from England, from Lebanon, from Palestine, from Syria, Afghanistan. So this ensemble, and we're going to go touring the world, playing concerts, going into schools, working with students like we did in the camp with the Syrian children. And we're going to, this is my lifelong dream to do this, and it's starting to happen, so this is pretty amazing. And the idea is to go, let's say we're in Iowa or Ohio and playing a concert, and we're going to go into the schools, teach the children these melodies, and so at the end of the concert they can come and play with us. So at that school in this town somewhere, wherever we are, the mother and the grandparents will see their children playing with these musicians and how that connects and what that would mean. We're going to create ambassadors of music and future peace builders. So I'm going back to Ritsona Camp in July with this great beatboxer who worked with them as well when we were there, like riffing with them and like a few words of Arabic, and and so immediately the connection happened, and the parents saw that, so they were, and because George was there playing melodies that they knew, it was a huge difference. My desire is to do something similar. I understand the Global Nomads, which is a group of people who bring. What I'd like to think about is to see this situation through the eyes of a child, so that we want to bring cameras into the camp and set up cameras in various schools throughout the United States and the world, and do a weekly music series at this camp and also with other students around the world, so that they can see these children, and hopefully through the children, they will influence their parents, and our children can be the children that we've been teaching them so nicely to be playing with their neighbors. So I guess that's it for me. So thank you so very much.
Well, I can't thank all of you enough. I wish we could bottle the wisdom that you shared with us today and the inspiration, and we could just unstop the bottles and drink when we needed fresh ideas and inspiration moving forward. So thanks again to all of you.